welcome to January 2024. Hopefully you're all optimistic about the year ahead, and we know in a very short amount of time, in fact, 31 days today, we'll be starting a legislative short session, and that will be our topic this morning, is to hear from 4 of our great partners in the lobby space, as well as our partner at the U.S. Chamber with Chris Eyler. Will give us an update from the federal level. Great. My name is Tom Hofford, and real special morning for me to get to chair this. Our co-chairs oftentimes run point, and was given the duties today. So I'm thrilled. I believe it or not, I used to do this way back in the day. So a lot of fun and great to have the 5 people you have in front of you here today. And Lena, thank you so much for your work on putting this program together. With that, we are going to start with, first let me introduce Chris Eyler with the U.S. Chamber. Chris resides in Washington, but is over a footprint that he'll describe to you. And Oregon is one of his key states of representation for the U.S. Chamber. Our organization has been a member, I don't want to misquote, but I think it's quite a few years. I got a membership call, a very nice call from the U.S. Chamber over the holidays, noting the number of years, and I should have remembered that, but for quite some time. And do appreciate the legislative and, the congressional updates that we receive on the federal side from Chris and his team. So with that, Chris, would you mind kicking us off?
Great. Thank you, Tom. Again, Happy New Year to all of you. Again, my name is Chris Eyler. I am the U.S. Chamber's Vice President for the Northwest region. As Tom mentioned, I am based in Washington State, and my role, because this is my first time meeting with this group, my role is to work with Lena and Tom and their counterparts at all of the state and local chambers of commerce, all of our partners, organizations in the states of Oregon, Alaska, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. We want to make sure that you are first and foremost aware of what we are doing on behalf of you and your members back here in Oregon when we're in DC. But we also want to make sure that we are getting as much input as possible from all of our local and state chamber partners, because we see you really as the backbone of our operation. You do a tremendous job in supporting our work in DC. You echo our message here back in Oregon with your congressional delegation. You know, as I've said a million times to a million chambers, we couldn't do what we do without you. So thank you for your support. So today, I am going to do everything possible to destroy whatever optimism you have about the new year, at least as it relates to the federal government. When we came into the 118th Congress, we were faced with a much different and a much more complicated political environment in which we were to try to advance our agenda. Coming off of 2 years of unified Democratic control of government, and coming into the 118th Congress, Democrats had expanded their majority in the U.S. Senate by 1 seat, and Republicans had narrowly taken control of the U.S. House of Representatives with a majority of 222 to 213. To put it bluntly, it has not gone well. Over the course of the past year, we have seen it took forever, 15 votes to name a speaker back in January. The government narrowly avoided an economically catastrophic default on the nation's debt. They narrowly avoided a shutdown at the end of the fiscal year in September, which upset House conservatives, who then proceeded to vote Speaker McCarthy out of office, the first time in U.S. history that a speaker had been removed from office. Then they spent the next 3 to 4 weeks trying to find another speaker, who then came into office to once again narrowly avoid another government shutdown. And then at the end of the year, for only the 6th time in history, they removed a sitting member from Congress, George Santos. Their majority has actually shrunk from 222 down to 220 to 213. And since I actually made this slide on Tuesday, another Republican member, a Republican from Ohio, announced that he is going to be immediately resigning from the House to take over as president of Youngstown State University. So their majority when they come back into session next week will be 219 to 213, which means that they can only afford to lose 2 members on any given vote. I wish I could say that things are going to improve moving forward, but in all likelihood, it isn't. At this point, this Congress is on pace to be one of the least, if not the least, productive Congress in the history of the country. So far, they have passed the fewest number of bills as any Congress in the first session of a Congress. And most of those bills were non-controversial bills or must-pass pieces of legislation. They were either things like post office renamings, or they, as I said, were must-pass pieces of legislation like bills to raise the debt ceiling, or the defense authorization bill, or continuing resolutions. What more, most of those bills ended up having more Democratic votes than Republican votes. Now, in an ideal world, that wouldn't really matter, but in the House of Representatives, which is the majoritarian body, that is a problem for the majority party if they're having to rely on Democrats to get most of the legislation through, particularly when that is one of the things that really upsets House conservatives, when the Speaker relies on the Democrats to get bills across the finish line. So that's kind of where we stand at the midpoint of this Congress. When they come back into session next week, they will have, as of today, they have 15 days until a partial government shutdown, unless they can get their act together and either pass another continuing resolution or miraculously somehow pass all 12 appropriations bills. We are currently operating under a two-tiered continuing resolution. The continuing resolution that they passed in November funded 4 of the appropriations bills until January 19th, and then the remaining 8 appropriations bills until February 2nd. At this point, there is no agreement on a top-line spending number. There is no path forward, as far as we know, as how they're going to accomplish this goal of getting the government funded beyond January 19th and then subsequently February 2nd. There's a lot of chatter that there will be another long-term continuing resolution that takes us to the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. However, if that were to happen, it would cause a 1% across the board cut to kick in that was agreed to as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was passed back in June when the debt ceiling was raised. That is not something that the Senate wants to see. That's not something the president wants to see, and that's not something Democrats want to see. However, House Republicans are increasingly seeing that as the most viable path forward because they want some pretty significant cuts. They also want a number of very conservative policy riders included in the appropriations bills, policy riders that would be unacceptable to both Senate Democrats and the president. So right now, we'll probably get a little bit more clarity on how this is all going to play out next week when they come back into session. But as of now, the 2 things to remember are that there is no agreement on a top line spending number, and there really is no agreement amongst anyone about how this process is going to play out past January 19th. One thing I do want to just bring up, and it's not so much of an issue here in Oregon, but there are actually members of Congress out there saying things like no one would notice if the government shuts down, or a government shutdown wouldn't be that bad. That is obviously a ridiculous statement. As I said, none of your members of Congress, either Republican or Democrat, are saying things like that. But nevertheless, a lot of what we have had to do over the past year is simply impress upon lawmakers that there are economic consequences to a government shutdown. And that's this, we put out a number of slides over the course following the end of the fiscal year, just to demonstrate what some of those consequences would be. And this slide discusses the number of people in Oregon who would be impacted directly if the government shut down. There are just over 11,000 members of the military who would not be paid. There are just over 11,000 individuals who likely would not be cleared to work through the E-Verify system. There are 1,600 businesses here in the state of Oregon that directly work with the government who would not continue to be paid. And there are a number of individuals or a number of businesses who would not receive SBA loans. So this is just a snapshot of who would be impacted if the government were to shut down. There are obviously other impacts given that this state is so heavily dependent on the federal government, particularly the Forest Service, BLM lands, and whatnot. Just to put a little bit of report on a little bit of positive news, though. This Congress has not been entirely non-productive. One of our top priorities coming into this Congress was permitting reform. The prior Congress, the 107th Congress, made some historic investments in infrastructure. First, in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the $1.2 trillion bill to bring our built infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, seaports, water and sewer into the 21st century. They also invested several $100 billion in the Chips and Sciences Act to bring silicon microprocessor manufacturing back to the US. And then the Inflation Reduction Act included quite a bit of money for green energy projects. The first two bills in particular, the U.S. Chamber was extremely supportive of. We were more or less neutral on the Inflation Reduction Act. There were a number of reasons that we did not support it, but they were unrelated to the clean energy pieces. But all of this investment is very good. It's desperately overdue and desperately needed, but we want to make sure this money is put to work and put to work quickly, and these projects get built. The problem is it takes too long to get federal permits right now. On average, under the law prior to last year, it was taking anywhere from 4.5 to 7 years to get all of the necessary permits under the National Environmental Policy Act. Fortunately, this is one area this Congress has made some progress. In the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the bill that raised the debt ceiling, there were some significant changes made to the NEPA law. These were the first changes to NEPA in over 50 years, and these changes require that permits be approved within 2 years. They also require that the process move more transparently and more efficiently, particularly when it involves the permitting process involves multiple agencies. One agency needs to be appointed as the lead agency in shepherding that permit through the process. Again, our view is that these changes will make this process move more quickly, more transparently. It isn't sexy, but as I said, it is the first change to NEPA in over 50 years, and we are hopeful that all of this money that Congress has approved over the past 2 years is going to get put to use and put to use quickly. There is still a lot more that we would like to see done. Once a permit gets approved, there are still challenges when outside groups come in and challenge a permit in court and can bog the permit down for multiple years until that case is resolved. We'd like to see that addressed so that that delay is reduced from years down to months. Another area where we are focused, where Congress has not been productive this past 2 years, is with respect to the worker shortages businesses are seeing in every sector of the economy, in every state. Nationally, right now, there are 3.2 million open jobs, or 3.2 million more job openings than there are unemployed individuals. Put another way, there are 3.2 million more jobs without any available workers. This is a problem that has been going on for a while. It precedes the pandemic. The pandemic actually exacerbated it. We saw a lot of people leave the workforce during the pandemic. They either retired early, they did not return to the workforce because there's not affordable childcare, or they just left for whatever reason. But even if all those people were to miraculously come back, you would still have a significant gap between the number of jobs and available workers. So put simply, we don't have enough people in this country to fill all the job openings we have. So we have been calling on Congress to address this by expanding legal immigration and allowing more workers to come into this country legally. We are taking a three-pronged approach to this. First, we are calling on Congress to address the issue of border security. Nothing else can be done with respect to immigration until you address the issue of border security. That means providing all of the relevant government agencies with the resources, the funding, the personnel, the technology they need to secure the border, to make sure that those coming into the country who want to come into the country are processed legally, and those that we do not want coming into the country are not allowed to come into the country. Right now, all of these agencies do not have enough personnel to process the influx of people trying to come into the country. You're watching the news right now, that's pretty obvious. They do not have enough administrative law judges to process asylum claims. And frankly, the asylum laws also need to be addressed. It is far too easy to claim asylum. A lot of these people who are coming in from the southern up through Central America, they're coming in for economics, seeking essentially economic asylum. That is not necessary. That is not a legitimate claim of asylum. So Congress really needs to take a hard look at the asylum laws, tighten them up, provide all of the agencies the resources they need to process claims to make sure they're legitimate, and also make sure that they have the resources to secure the border. Second, we need to fix our system of broken employment-based visas. There are all sorts of visas, H-1B, H-1A, H-2B, so forth and so on, visas that are tied to employment. These programs are antiquated. They're not responsive to the needs of employers right now. They do not allow enough people to come in to fill all the needs we have. And it's far too bureaucratic. When individuals are trying to come into the country legally, it takes too long and it can be very expensive to do so. So Congress, we desperately need Congress to fix these visa programs, to allow more people to come in, to make it more efficient for those programs to bring people in, and make it less expensive on employers so that they can bring in the workers they need to fill all of these job openings. And then lastly, we need to make sure that employers have the resources they need to verify that the people they are hiring are here legally and eligible to work. Now, what is the reality of getting any of this done? I would say that the most realistic possibility, or the most realistic thing we will see get done is with respect to border security. The supplemental appropriations request that the president has submitted for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, the Republicans have said they will not pass that unless some kind of border security provisions are attached to that piece of legislation. So there are ongoing negotiations right now. They are bipartisan negotiations in the Senate with the White House on finding some sort of path forward on border security. So we remain hopeful that we can at least see some progress here. But given the current political environment, it's hard to get too excited at this point that we're going to actually see something happen. But if anything's going to happen, it will be on border security. The other two pieces, visa reform and the employee verification piece, that's going to be a much heavier lift, particularly given the current political environment and the fact that we're in an election year. Excuse me. The last thing that we are very focused on right now is the issue of regulatory overreach. Every time a president loses unified government, irrespective of that president typically will start to try to push their priorities through the administrative rulemaking process. The Biden administration is no different. We are seeing a lot of regulatory activity across every single agency. But on one issue in particular, we are seeing a very coordinated, very aggressive effort on behalf of the Biden administration, and that is to promote unionization. President Biden came into office saying that he would be the most pro-union president in history, and he is doing everything he can to fulfill that promise. And right now, what we are seeing is a lot of activity at the Department of Labor and the National Labor Relations Board to essentially enact a pro-labor agenda through the administrative rulemaking process. Among other things, they are trying to raise the overtime threshold under which employees must be paid overtime from $35,568 a year to $55,068 a year, and also include an automatic increase every 3 years. They're trying to expand the definition of joint employer so that particularly with respect to franchises, it'll be a lot easier to unionize franchises. They want to limit employer free speech rights. So if there is an effort to unionize a business, they want to limit that business's ability to talk with their employees about what it means to unionize the workforce of that business. They want to do things like gerrymander employer bargaining units so that it's more easy to unionize a bargaining unit. If the full bargaining, say if this room represented a full bargaining unit, but only that table wanted to get unionized, they want to allow that table to be gerrymandered off of the bargaining unit and allow that table to unionize. But it goes beyond just the rulemaking process. We put out a report last fall that goes through a lot of what we are observing at agencies across the entire federal government. The Department of Commerce, when they are rolling out grants under the CHIPS and Science Act, is doing things like requiring project labor agreements. The Department of Treasury is using certain tax credits to promote unionization. Even things as simple as websites. There's a lot of talk on federal websites now about the pros of unionization. Now, this is not to say that we are just blanket opposed to unions, but our position here is that the government's role should be to create a level playing field. It should not be putting its thumb on the scale in one way or the other. Now, lastly, since it is an election year, I do want to touch on that really quickly. The likelihood that you're going to see a sea change in how things are happening at the federal level is pretty slim. What we have seen over the past 25 years or so is that polarization has really become the norm. And if you look at all of the election cycles since the year 2000 through 2022, there have been 12 election cycles. 10 of those election cycles have resulted in some kind of change in control of government, meaning that when the White House flipped from Republican to Democrat or vice versa, the House flipped, the Senate flipped. There has been across all 12 of those elections, 10 of those have resulted in some kind of change of control of government. Contrast that with the period from 1960 to the year 2000, there were 20 election cycles. Only 7 of those resulted in any kind of change in control of government. And up from 1960 through the early 1995, Democrats controlled the House continuously. So why is this important? When you see this much change in control so frequently, members of Congress have less and less incentive to work with the other side. And sure enough, when you look at what happened between 1960 and the year 2000, there are plenty of examples where there were bipartisan coalitions built to get big pieces of legislation through Congress. Since the year 2000, members of Congress just aren't willing to work across the aisle. When big things do go through Congress, they go through on party line votes. They use procedural mechanisms like budget reconciliation, where they can pass things in the Senate on a simple majority. You're just not seeing a lot of bipartisanship going on right now. And given the current makeup of the very narrow majorities in both the House and Senate, it's likely that you're going to continue to see this pattern moving forward for the foreseeable future. Furthermore, you're seeing fewer and fewer competitive congressional districts. At the beginning of the 21st century, there were on average 77 competitive congressional districts. And by competitive, I mean the voters in a congressional district voted for a member of Congress from one party and voted for a president from the other. In the early 2000s, there were 77 on average 77 congressional districts that were considered competitive. Over the course of the 2020 and 2022 elections, that average has fallen to just 22 congressional seats. Here, what is happening is members of Congress no longer really care so much about general elections where they would have to move to the center. They are much more worried about primaries now, and so they've moved to their ideological extremes. Democrats become much more progressive, Republicans become much more conservative. Looking to the 2024 cycle, the Cook Political Report states that there are right now 23 seats that are considered competitive. 5 of those are Democrats in Republican districts, and 18 of those are Republicans in Democrat districts. 3 of those districts are in the Northwest. One here in Oregon, Representative Lori Chavez-DeRemer, a Republican in the Oregon 4th Congressional District, is in a district that is rated as a Democratic district. In Washington State, Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in the Washington 3rd Congressional District surrounding Vancouver and Southwest Washington. She is a Democrat in a Republican district. In Alaska, Representative Peltola, who is a Democrat in a very, very Republican state. So if you want to see where a lot of outside money and outside groups are going to be engaging in the Pacific Northwest in the coming election cycle, it's going to likely be in these 3 districts. In the Senate, you have 33 senators in cycle. 20 of those are Democrats, 10 are Republicans, and 3 are independents that align with the Democrats. And 5 of those 33 seats are open seats. Again, the Senate is 51-49 in favor of the Democrats right now. So Republicans only need, depending on who is president, Democrat or Republicans would only need to take back 1 seat if it's a Republican president, or if President Biden wins again, they would need to take back 2 seats to retake the majority. It does not look very good for Democrats. When you look at the map right now, all of the competitive seats, Senate races are in Republican seats, or they are Democrats who are currently in Republican state seats or Republican states. West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Montana, and Arizona are going to be like the likely seats that you would see a flip. Potentially Nevada, potentially Michigan. So I'm not going to really make any predictions. Things have gone haywire since 2016, and it's a fool's errand to make predictions. But you know, the likelihood that you're going to see some kind of change in control of government again is pretty high, given the narrow majorities and the number of competitive seats. The last thing I just want to mention is next week on January 11th at 8 a.m. Pacific time, our CEO, Suzanne Clark, will be delivering our annual State of American Business Address, where she will be discussing a lot of the things I just discussed, our current take on the political environment in DC, and laying out our priorities for the upcoming year. It is a virtual event, so all of you are welcome to register to log on and attend. Just go to our website and the registration information is there. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
We did build in a little time today, and if you're one who follows agendas very closely, you'll notice we're up against that change, but we do have some time to allow Chris to field some questions. Starting up, Amy.
Do you have a sense of the client job shortage that we have? What type of jobs are they? And as a second part of that, is the chamber ever with the Department of Education? What I see is that our workforce is really well prepared.
Yeah, you know, on your second piece, yes, we do. We've been very active when it comes to the reauthorizations of the Elementary and Secondary Act, the Workforce Investment Act. You know, there's a number of bills that have worked their way through Congress over the past 5 years and are in the process of beginning the reauthorization process. And we are very actively engaged with Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, the House Education and Workforce Committee, and the Department of Education in making sure that when those laws are reauthorized, they are helping to align those programs better with the needs of employers. We do have information on where all those job openings are. I just don't have them at the top of my head. They're on our website. We have a website called America Works, where we have a lot of data, the America Works data center, and there's a lot of information on the current worker shortage and where all those open, you know, there's a lot of state by state data too. So I'd encourage you to look at that.
Questions, John?
I have a question. So as it stands, U.S. debt over $30 trillion, Social Security and Medicare are bigger expenses, mandatory obligations we have said not have any money to fund these in the future, for living too long, and et cetera. So when I look at our expenses, I as a country, where's the money going to come from? Right. So what do you hear? I mean, right now in the U.S., we're in a low tax environment. You know, we're under 40%.
Yeah.
Is there any talks of going back to like 70%, like back in the 70s and so on? What do
Well-
you hear from?
On that specifically, no, there's no talks going back on that, but more broadly, you really hit the nail on the head. And right now, all of the noise that's coming out of Washington DC on spending has to do with discretionary spending. Problem is with them on the mandatory side, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These programs grow automatically every year. They are consuming more and more of the federal budget. I don't have it on this slide deck, but I have another slide that shows a pie chart. And if you look at the pie chart, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid currently take approximately 2/3 of federal outlays. That's where we really need Congress to get serious about addressing spending. These programs keep growing year after year. The Social Security trustees say that by the year 2033, less than 10 years from now, the Social Security Administration will not be able to pay out full benefits anymore because they will not be taking in enough money. Medicare runs out of money even sooner. With respect to Medicare, this is a 1960s era program trying to operate in a 21st century world. It desperately needs to be reformed. It desperately needs to reflect how healthcare is delivered now, not how it was in the 1960s. Social Security, one of our prior chief economists used to say that if you gathered up all the Social Security experts in the world, you put them into a room, they'd be able to fix it within 5 minutes because there's not that many plausible solutions to address Social Security spending. It's raising the income threshold, raising the payroll withholding. It's a fairly limited number of solutions. The problem is there just isn't political will to do anything to do this. We have been very vocal for as long as I've worked for the chamber about Congress needs to get serious about mandatory spending, and we're going to continue to do so. But right now, what you're seeing in DC is they're focused on discretionary spending, which you could eliminate the entire Department of Defense budget, and you're still going to have this problem because Social Security and Medicare will just keep eating up more and more spending.
Last questions for Chris. Okay, Chris is going to be joining us quarterly. We hope you find this information pretty informative. We realize that this isn't always drilled right into Oregon, but I think it's really important that as an organization we're tracking these federal issues. Chris reaches out to myself and Lena for some support on certain things going on at the federal level, and the Salem Chamber does take action. Chris, I am curious, could you give a perspective of how many local Oregon chambers participate? Are we one of the leading chambers? Are we lagging behind? Tell us how we're doing.
I will say you are one of the more active ones of the local chambers, not just here in Oregon, but also in the region. One of the ways we encourage local chambers to get involved and to weigh in on issues is we organize coalition letters to Capitol Hill on the issues that we are prioritizing. And Tom and Lena are always very good about making sure that you are represented on those letters when your priorities align with ours. So thank you for that. But looking at those letters, you are, as I said, you're not just one of the more active ones here in Oregon, but you're one of the more active ones in the Pacific Northwest. So thank you for that.
But if you are a chamber member and wishing to connect on the federal level with Chris, he is happy to do that with you, either a phone call, via Zoom, the like. He is in the region on occasion, and again, we'll be featuring Chris moving forward each quarter. So Chris, thank you for your time today very much. We are now going to transition to our 4 local lobbyists here in the state of Oregon. They're each very talented in their own right, representing their own companies. Before I do that, they always say, if you have some thunder, and you may lose your audience towards the end, we know at 8:30 everybody will disperse and get back to real life. On Monday, if you have not heard, the Salem Chamber will be hosting Governor Tina Etobicoke for our morning. Do not want to miss Monday's forum. It's going to be a great chance for us to, number one, this will be the governor's first address to a chamber of commerce during her time in office. Number two, it will be an opportunity for her to give us a bit of a keynote, but then for us to share a conversation and ask a number of questions of our governor on some key strategic issues that affect businesses, and that will be conducted by our president, Alan Rasmussen. So I would invite you on Monday, if you have not yet registered, to log on to salemchamber.org. Monday, January 8th, the convention center that is sponsored all season long by our partners at Hagen Hamilton Insurance. And on Monday, our monthly sponsor is Summit Wealth Management. Thank you to Brandon Blair and our board team for that. With that, we are going to transition over to the short session agenda. And to preview that, we have 4 of our skilled lobbyists here, chamber members and all very good in their own right. Nicole Palmateer Hazelbaker will kick us off. She's a strategic communications expert with experience in government affairs, fundraising, campaign management, and public relations. Nicole founded Bravio Communications in 2005 to serve a diverse companies in pharmaceutical, social services, public agency, financial, and professional services industry. Nicole, we welcome you.
Thank you. My 6-year-old wrote that. That's why it sounds so good. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I come in Bravio Communications, and I'm honored to represent also the Salem Chamber of Commerce. So thank you all for showing up here bright and early this morning. We just came back for Christmas vacation yesterday, so still kind of figuring out where I am. I asked Lena if I could go first, so I could just give a little bit of an overview of kind of the framework or the landscape that we're going into, and then Ryan made this great little thing for me, which is so nice. Thanks, Ryan. No, I'm just kidding. But and then of course my colleagues will fill in with their perspectives on it. You know, the great thing about lobbyists is we talk fast, so don't worry, Tom. We'll get you right back on schedule. No problems whatsoever. Coming into the short session, I think that there's a lot of things that are going to be at play here, and what you can't undercut here is what our friend here from the U.S. Chamber said, that it is an election cycle. We're going into a big election season, presidential election, got a number of congressional seats open in Oregon. For the first time that I can remember, and I'm not sure if it's ever happened, we have all the statewide offices open. So Treasurer, Secretary of State, Attorney General, what's the 4th one? Just went out of my head.
Well, governor, but that's not
Not the governor. Anyway, they're all up for office. And that plays into how people are going to approach the session. So you have, for example, you have co-chair Elizabeth Steiner from the Portland area. She's a physician. She's the co-chair of Ways and Means on the Senate side. She's declared she's running for treasurer, but she's not stepping down before the short session. She's maintaining her seat, and I believe intends to stay in her seat at the end of its. But she is also running for office. Currently, Speaker Dan Rayfield from the Corvallis area is running for Attorney General. He is also currently, obviously, in a position of leadership. He does not intend to leave his end of the current term in the end of January. We'll see what he does with his leadership position, whether he lets that go, but he is maintaining it through the February session. You have Senator James Manning, who is going to be running for Secretary of State, along with Tobias Reed, who's the current treasurer. So all these people are maintaining their day jobs. And in the past, at least to my recollection, and my friends here can correct me, a lot of times people declare for large offices and kind of step out of their seat. Okay, like we're going to maintain that time and we're going to move on.
Just really quick, I don't know these people. Do you mind sharing their Republican or Democrat Corvallis?
Sure. So Speaker Rayfield is a Democrat.
Oh.
Senator Steiner is a Democrat. Senator Manning is a Democrat. Tobias Reed is a Democrat. There are some Republicans who have declared, but right now these people are currently in leadership because they're Democrats. So it changes the balance a little bit for myself as a lobbyist, and I'd hazard for my friends here, how we interact with them on a campaign level. February session changes the dynamic by quite a bit. Changes certainly how, for my clients, how we approach campaign contributions. It changes, how the conversations we're having, and it changes our plans. We're starting to set the framework for 2025, but we know some of these people aren't going to be here. In Oregon, you can only file to run for 1 seat. So, for example, any member of the House who's running, for example, Representative Maxine Dexter has announced she's going to be running for Congress. She will have to step out of her seat. She's currently the chair of House Housing. So, what does that mean down the road? Involved in a work group with her, but she's not going to be here. So what does that mean? There's just a lot of that kind of at play. The congressional races have a lot of interest in it, with Congressman Earl Blumenauer stepping out, who's been a long time in place, Democrat in Portland. number of people jumping into that race, changing the dynamic, certainly in the Portland area, in the county, in the city, as well as here in the House, here in the state legislature. So these kinds of things are sort of changing how we look at the session, who's here, but who's going to be here, and kind of, how do you make your long-term plans versus your short-term plans? So I think you'll see a lot of those dynamics in there, a lot of questions about who's next, if this person's going to be the speaker or who's not and who's that. And then what happens in the campaign and how we're setting up for, which seats are competitive here in Oregon, similarly to how we're looking at it at the federal level. How is that going to play into, our goals and our priorities? Certainly, for the chamber, we're looking at the types of things that help make our community more business friendly, help make the community and the area in Oregon as a state able to support business, able to not only attract people here, but to retain the businesses that are already here, continue to move forward and grow. So we'll be continuing those conversations. Lena and I work really closely together. We'll keep updating the chamber with that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Ryan Tribbett.
Good morning, everybody. I think it's really interesting to have these different perspectives all up here because I think our presentations are all going to be quite a little bit different. I know I'm going to try to kind of give a positive and show what the business community can do and show you some glimmers of hope and some successes that we've had over the last year or so and what I think we might be able to accomplish in the next year going forward. So just to provide a little bit of historical context, this is the February session. It's been in place for about 13 years now, I think. And it was really sold to voters as something that was for really small little budgetary tweaks and recalibrations, implementation problems with bills that were passed in the previous session. That sort of original intent is gone. That is completely gone now. Just in the last 2 election cycles, we have 2/3 of the entire legislative body has changed. So none of the current elected officials feel that they're bound to that commitments that were made when the short session was originally passed. And when you put that together with the fact that candidate filing deadline comes right off the heels of adjournment, and then the endorsement process from all of the base groups on both sides, Republican and Democrat, it really has become the campaign posturing session. Like this is the campaign session, these short sessions. And so let's see. So, but I want to give you some positive sense here because of the accelerated timeline and their ability. There's a lot of really accelerated hurdles that you have to jump. Like at the end of the first week, you have to be posted to be on an agenda to move out of committee by the end of the second week. And then you have to be posted on agenda in the third week to move out of the second chamber in the fourth week. Is essentially how fast paced it is. Small little hiccups can make bills die. So if the business community really gets aggressive, coalesce around identifying the biggest threats and getting right to work on them, your ability to defeat bad legislation, or at least delay it to the long session, is much better than it would be in a 6-month long session. Coming into this from the last election cycle, if you remember, the business community did put their mind to sort of 2 big objectives. One was break the supermajority, and the second was support the rise of those mod caucus and moderate candidates in the Democratic Party. And that has been wildly successful. We saw the impact of that on multiple levels last long session. This is going to be our first short session with that. We're already seeing the signs of that. If you look at the Oregonian story yesterday, when they talked about what the governor's priorities are, and she's asking for all this money, $500 million in housing, and that's a big lot. But she's focused on production and supply and not on rent control, not on vacancy control, not on all those tenant protections and things. And that's the impact of the mod caucus, because they have told their leadership that stuff is non-starters and off the table. So I think let's take a moment, while in the context of the circumstances that we all see that are very overwhelming, that we can still get things done when we put our minds to it and we support each other. Let's see, in terms of my personal bills, because I was asked to talk a little bit about our personal bills. So I represent a significant contingent of construction industry. We have a bill that affects small businesses, I think, at a very significant day-to-day level. There's something called retainage. It's a 5% withhold on construction projects, both in public projects and private projects. And that's 5% of real dollars being held, and you don't get it back until after your work is done. In some cases, we have examples from contractors who buildings been occupied for a year and they still haven't had their retainage released to them. Most profit margins in construction are very low, under that 5%. And so this is an undue burden, especially on small emerging businesses. And so what we've been working with, and we had a bill last session and it got overly complicated and died towards on the last day of session actually, but partnering with AGC, the National Electrical Contractors Association, Associated Wall and Ceiling Contractors have teamed up, and we have now the chair of the business committee, Paul Holvey, introducing a bill that will allow us to post a bond, essentially an insurance product, to represent 5% of what that construction cost value is. And we just ran the numbers and we did an estimate on it. Like if you were going to withhold $500,000, someone with good credit could go get a bond for $10,000. So the difference of $490,000 in the hands of small businesses to either work on hiring new employees, taking on new projects. I mean, this is going to have a dramatic impact on the day-to-day operations of small businesses. And I feel really good about it. You're never going to see that kind of thing in a mail piece and a political ad. It's never going to be some big partisan breakdown, but some of that really meaningful, granular, detailed work can still be done when we put our minds to it. And the other bill I have is actually one that Chris kind of mentioned a little bit about the NEPA process. And what that's in my firm we call double jurisdiction. And we have a bill for a utility scale solar developer, New Sun Energy, that we're introducing. And we actually got support from the majority leader, Julie Fahey, to introduce this bill as one of her 2 personal bills. And it would say on any federal land where they're going through the NEPA process already, energy facility can avoid and be exempted from the FSEC process, which would be another year of review and very costly depending on the project too. So those are 2 very positive things for small businesses. Regulatory streamlining, I think it's been since probably the mid 2000s or early 2000s with Ted Kulingowski since we've had the government take like a holistic look at regulatory streamlining, and it's probably long overdue. But I bring those examples up to try to inspire you and give you a little bit of motivation that if we can still accomplish things when we put our effort to it. It can be challenging. It will definitely be frustrating, but it can be done. You mentioned this already, but the total up the bills, I should have put the number of bills here when you have the limitations, 2 bills for 30 senators, 2 bills for 60 representatives. I totaled up the number of committees and all of the thing. It comes out to roughly 300 bills in a 5-week session. This is ridiculous. They inundate the process with so much garbage now that it's impossible and shuts out all the conversation of meaningful public debate, dialogue around the issues that matter. But that doesn't mean we have to be resigned to our fate because the legislature has sort of squeezed us out of the process. We can create our own forums like this to talk about the issues that matter, to coalesce around an agenda and build momentum. One of the things I'm excited about 2024 is my firm is working on is we're hosting economic summits. For many years, we've been doing the Eastern Oregon Economic Summit. It's been in Hermiston or LeGrand. This next year, we're bringing back the Coastal Economic Summit. That's going to be in Lincoln City. We're also starting for the first time ever a Southern Oregon Economic Summit, where we're bringing together and hopefully partnering with chambers and OBI to really raise the profile of the issues, work as sort of incubators of new ideas, proactive agenda that we can bring forward, build momentum, raise awareness and build momentum behind our agenda. And we'll invite legislators like those mod caucus members I was talking about to sort of come join our parade, lead the parade, that we can still get these things done. We have a number of issues coming up. Robust election cycle, as mentioned, I see as a positive thing because those are opportunities. They need to make friends. They need support. This is an opportunity for you to educate. They're going to spend more time than your 15-minute, tight meetings you get when the legislative session's in. And you can get an hour of their time or more to really educate them and seek commitments in exchange for your support. That's how it's always been done. It's sort of the bread and butter how this thing works. So let's go back to the basics. Big issues I see coming that are potential looming threats that no one's talking about is I see on the transportation side of things. We have a big thing coming, transportation funding. My firm worked on securing a 2-year moratorium on the tolling. I don't know, people don't see this coming, but it was authorized like in 2017, a very obscure small passage that granted revenue generating authority to the Transportation Commission to enact tolls. They then went forward like 5 years later trying to implement 20+ tolls on the east side of Portland without any public debate or dialogue, at least not in the legislature, where you could actually affect change. Now they've, while we got and secured the 2-year moratorium, ODOT's still pursuing forward, and they just announced that they have another dozen or so tolls planned for the west side. And if this trajectory is allowed to sort of go forward and be established, Salem and Eugene are next. I promise you that. This is the chance to still get in front of it and affect it before the die is cast. And so, well, I was trying to end on a positive note. Yes. We'll move on to Kelsey.
Right. See.
Good morning, everybody. Kelsey Wilson. My firm is here in Salem called Legislative Advocates Government Affairs. And we represent a variety of, including Oregon Business and Industry is one of our clients. So the statewide chamber, OBI, but do work in energy, cable and telecommunications, a little bit of education, and a lot of healthcare, and then just general business. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. I will just kind of piggyback on some of the comments that my colleagues have made and add a little bit more color to some of those things. I think one thing that we haven't heard yet that is looming in advance of the 24 February session is we're still waiting on a Measure 113 decision out of the courts on whether the Senate Republicans who walked out in the 23 session and had 10 or more unexcused absences will be able to run for re-election. So that's going to be a decision that I think we're hoping to see in advance of February, but could kind of determine some of the dynamics that we see in the February session. I'm optimistic that we won't have another walkout in the February session, but that is certainly something that there's some posturing going on that could impact some of the conversations and legislation that Democrats are pushing forward in that session. So definitely, there's a cloud over the session waiting on that decision. A couple other things that you heard is a lot of members running for different offices, statewide offices, congressional seats. But I think it's also important to remember that knowing that the Speaker of the House, Stan Rayfield, is running for the Attorney General and will no longer be Speaker of the House post 2024, there's a lot of posturing going on within the caucuses for who's going to be the next speaker and who's going to be the next majority leader. And so that's going to influence some of the conversations and where legislators within those caucuses are jockeying for votes and support headed past the 2024 legislative session and trying to figure out how they rise through the ranks of their caucuses. So that's something else to watch for. We do have interim legislative days next week. We have a series of those during the interim, and next week will be one where we will see a lot of the legislation previewed, more than we have seen in the past. For what we're going to see in the 2024 session, we'll probably see committee bills. We'll see a lot of member bills. Those are starting to populate on the OLA system. But I think what we have continued to see, especially in these short sessions, is there's a lot of placeholder legislation and placeholder bills and kind of hiding the ball on what some of this legislation really is intended to do. And so, and then amendments come in the first week of session. And I think you heard Ryan say the deadlines are so quick and so fast that, they'll try and adopt an amendment. And if it's got agreement, great, but it's very hard to get everybody on board, get the votes. But it's also very hard to lobby a bill that you don't know what it looks like. The devil's in the details and all of these things. And so if we don't have the language for what they're actually trying to do until that first week of session, and then it's got to be moved so quickly, the pace is atrocious during especially those first couple weeks of the short February session. And then it really kind of narrows the scope, and we know what is left and gives us a little bit more time to work. I'm sure you've all read in the press you've heard probably from the governor. You know, the key issues in this February session are the housing, the homelessness, the ballot measure 110, which is the drug legalization or decriminalization, and you know, in conversations with leadership, those issues are very, very much the focus of the legislative session, especially when you've got a Speaker of the House who's running for Attorney General. You know, he hears the cries, he sees the polling. The ballot measure 110 is going to be hanging over all of these legislators and elected official heads. And so they need to figure out how to make some changes to that, whether they can agree on what those changes look like and get that across the finish line in a short February session, I think is yet to be seen. But I think the focus is very much going to be on those really, really high profile issues headed into this the 2024 election cycle. So I think with that, there's also, you know, we did have a 6-week walkout in the 2023 session. So there were some things that didn't make it across the finish line in that 23 session that are likely to come back. There was what I refer to as some lazy legislating going on during that walkout period, because it was very unclear whether we were actually going to finish a legislative session or not, or it was just going to expire. And so there's some cleanup work that needs to be done on some things that got rushed at the end of session. There's some bills that maybe some thought were ready for prime time, but didn't quite get there because people kind of just didn't think they were going to go anywhere, so didn't do the work that needed to be done in that last couple months of the legislative session. So watching for those things popping up in this February session are going to be on my radar as well. I will just a couple things that I'm working on in the short session is I am part of this budget funding ask for about $27 million for we're calling it Community Impact Project. It's the sports facilities. It's a package deal between the Hillsborough Hops, the Eugene Emeralds, and I'm representing the Salem Baseball Club, which is trying to bring turf baseball fields to Willamette University, turf baseball and softball fields to Willamette University. It would be our first turf fields in Salem for baseball and softball, which is near and dear to my heart as a baseball mom. And so I am working on that project, and the Hops and the M's both have looming deadlines from Major League Baseball that if they don't get the rest of their funding, then they will be leaving the state. So that would be really unfortunate. So that's one of the things that I think the chamber may be interested in keeping an eye on, is that community development project for the Salem Baseball Club, and bringing sports. You know, we saw in the governor's 2023 Portland task force survey that nearly half of the respondents identified professional sports facilities as the city of Portland's most important amenity. So I think bringing that kind of community partner to Salem with a collegiate team, and then access for youth sports to use that facility, because none of our high schools have that ability, is something that's would be a great thing for this community. So I'm also working on some summer learning funding to keep kids learning and engaged throughout the summer. Boys and Girls Clubs is one of my clients, and that's something that's been important to keep kids engaged and out of trouble during the summer, and advance their academic careers. So there are a lot of money asked. Ryan mentioned the governor's $500 million for housing. There is education asked, there's summer learning asked, there's only a finite amount of money. And I think we've heard that from leadership too. They're also very worried about kind of the roll-up costs going forward. So recognizing there are some limitations, there's going to be a large focus on the funding and the budget this short session as well. So I think with that, I will stop. We did see a CPP, the Climate Protection Program, ruling come out just before the holiday that determined that it was invalid. The Climate Protection Program that DEQ set up was invalid. I don't necessarily expect anything in the short session on that, but that is going to be a conversation throughout the interim on what a climate program looks like in Oregon, given that decision from the Court of Appeals. The DEQ, I think, has till January 24th to appeal that. So we will see what they do then, and those conversations will start in earnest, you know, if not during session, but post-session, about what a climate program looks like going forward in Oregon. So I will really stop there and turn it over to my colleague, JL.
Thanks, Kelsey. I'm JL Wilson with Public Affairs Counsel. We are a business lobby firm. Our building's in Salem on Liberty Street, just south of downtown. I always look at this, you know, what's in it for me? And by me, I mean just us generally as business people. I think that this session, we're all likely to be slightly actually better off if the February session actually convenes and does its work. And the reason I say that is because for the first time, I think in my history, the interests of the two major parties are actually aligned for 30 days. The Democrats need the Republicans to show up, and they need them to show up because they have to do something to show that they address Measure 110. Because I think the Democrats believe that Measure 110 is uniquely a liability for them in elections, and uniquely a liability for Dan Rayfield as he tries to run for Attorney General. And I can only presume he decided to stay as Speaker because he wanted some Measure 110 fix on his resume to run on. And the Republicans have leverage for the first time in my lifetime, or since the life of the short session, because they've actually said, you know, give us a reason to show up, because the discipline has already been meted out. They can't run for re-election. They have no reason to show up. They can show up or not. And so you've got this interesting confluence of events where interests are aligned. I do think Republicans want to be constructive players because there are things in the session that they want too. As Kelsey mentioned, there is an extraordinary amount of money being proposed to be spent this session, like $1 billion. And, you know, our Ways and Means Committee has been a little more judicious with the money, to their great credit. But our revenue in this state has become like a video game. The numbers just keep going up and up and up. And it does give legislators, you know, starry eyes to think about all of the money that they can appropriate and be heroes, you know, in their local communities. So you have alignment of interests that I think actually works in all of our benefit this session, because both parties need each other to accomplish their various objectives. So what do I think will happen? It's been alluded to, Measure 110. There will be some fix. There has to be some fix, because Dan Rayfield is not coming back as Speaker to do nothing. You know, a lot of these folks view this as a liability. There will be something. I don't know whether it's prohibiting open use. I doubt it'll go so far as to recriminalize possession, but there will be something that happens. Now, whether we're happy with it or not, I don't know, but there will be some forward progress on that measure to start to rein in the excesses that we've all seen spill out into our communities. So I view that as probably a slight net positive. The other issue with respect to Governor Kotek's priority on building on home supply. Awesome. And I will say this about Governor Kotek. She has acted like, I believe, a true executive. She has had 2 or 3 priorities. She's stuck to those priorities. This is unfinished business from the 2023 session. And I can't help but think that anything that would increase housing supply is going to be a net benefit to our economy and the ripple impacts that feeds through to all of us in the supporting ecosystem of professional support businesses. So I view that as a net positive. I view the fact that because they need each other, and I don't think you're going to get policy going off the rails this session. There's 4 buckets of legislation in a short session. The short session was designed for all these little tweaks and fixes that you all hear about. Okay, so there's that bucket. You've got some of these major things that they want to get done. The reality is, if that's not negotiated by February 5th, the reality is the session is just too short to negotiate things meaningfully. So that work is happening now. So anything big that's going to happen is going to be pre-negotiated largely going into the session. The third tranche of bills that scares me to death is the ones where the majority party basically just says, damn the torpedoes, we're just exercising sheer political power and muscling stuff through. That's the stuff that scares me. I mean, think about the minimum wage legislation was a 2016 short session bill. The big one last in 2020 was the overtime for farm workers, which it hasn't had a major impact on ag yet, but the big impacts are in the offing. Those are the type of bills where it is like there's not enough time to study impacts, do whatever. They're just going to do it. And then the fourth tranche of bills, which is actually the largest, and I would caution all of you to temper your reaction when you see a lot of these bills, is they're purely political positioning. Because I think the most salient fact is that the candidate filing deadline is 2 days after this session ends. Nobody wants to pick up a primary opponent during the course of session, because some dissatisfied constituent says, I can do this better. You weren't conservative enough. You weren't progressive enough. And all of a sudden you find yourself with a primary competitor on Tuesday, March 12th. That is the thing that drives a lot of people. So you're going to see a lot of bills that do wild things. These bills keep me up at night because I'm like all my colleagues, you go into session, everything is a threat. And I don't want to be the guy who lost a bill on a 35-day session, and nobody here does either. So you got a situation where there's a lot of political posturing bills. These bills are not necessarily intended to pass. They're more intended to position and say, look what I did. A case in point, I remember when Representative Witt tried to change districts, come down to Salem to run against Tom Anderson and Jackie Leung. He had this luxury tax bill. And we'd never seen this bill before. I was going out of my mind. Everybody was worried about it. And, of course I should, but, we're all very risk averse. So I'm not just going to say, well, no, there's no chance that'll pass. Of course it's a live round. But it's political positioning. And it was intended for him to try to show something to that electorate. And now replicate that across 90 legislators who don't want to see a primary opponent. So you'll get a fair chunk of bills intended to do that. From the business community side, I would not get over the moon excited about the opportunity to move the ball forward on business related issues if they haven't already been pre-negotiated. And I have not been part of any negotiation on any number of these issues, which tells me it's largely not going to get done. Because the last point I'll make is, while the party in charge, and in this session it's Democrats, as it has been for I think all the short sessions to date, they're not going to stick their friends in the eye on the way out the door. The last memory that their friends and their benefactors will have of them is not going to be that their friends hose them in a short session. So what it is to say is any of the folks that typically support Democrats, they have veto power over any piece of legislation coming through. If we wanted to run a bill that did something for business, fix the pay equity laws or fix the stacking now that can occur with paid family leave and OFLA. If we wanted to do that, any of the groups, whether it's AFL or SEIU, any of them can just say, we're not doing that. And the Democrats are going to say, we're not doing that. Because why would they stick their biggest friends in the eye in their last opportunity to legislate on their behalf. So I just want you to temper your expectations, but then I'm going to go all the way back to my beginning and say, I do think on balance, this session holds more promise than not, if it materializes. And I do think that on balance, we will be better off as businesses and Oregonians if the promise of this session actually materializes. Fixing 110, addressing housing supply, even that on its own is probably a net positive, and I look forward to that. Though I will say one last thing, because Kelsey brought up the thing that we're all just on pins and needles about, which is this climate protection plan. Why does this matter to you? It matters to you because it's the regulation of natural gas in business processes, industrial processes. And so it flows through on any user of natural gas, whether you as a home consumer or whether it's made in the manufacture or fabrication or whatever of products. Major industries are going to see major price shocks on one of their business inputs in this state that they won't see in any other state. And I think we've been warning the DEQ for a long time. This is going to have dramatic impacts on industry in this state that make it completely cost uncompetitive. Now, the appeals court came out of nowhere and gave us respite, but they gave us respite on the narrowest little sliver. And which is basically, they said DEQ did not follow proper notice requirements. So, wow. So we're all we don't quite know what this means. Stay tuned. I do believe it's the biggest business issue in the state. And because we all have a dependency on the availability and the affordability of natural gas. And that is gravely threatened if this thing goes through. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of interest in that issue. So I bring that up because people say climate protection plan, think about in terms of natural gas and what you're paying. And not just as a homeowner, but every product that uses natural gas that gets made in this state of Oregon has massive industrial implications for the state and our job basis. So I will conclude with that. I want to be positive. I do think that the session will generally be positive if it follows through on its promise.
We had a program here in the chamber last month regarding the CCIs, which is a part of CPP. So that too is on hold.
Correct.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify to JL's point, they did rule on that narrow, but the notification requirement, but they didn't even get to any of the other substantive arguments because they threw it out right from the beginning. So I think there is discussion about, well, what if we just go back and correct the process at the EQC? Could we then just go forward? I think there would still be challenges to that because the courts didn't even look at kind of the other underlying arguments to the challenge of the CPP. They just threw it out right from the top without digging any deeper. So I would caution the proponents who think that they can just fix that little technical change and get the program back up and running right away.
We'll turn it up to questions for our panelists now.
Yeah, I sat down with the sitting state legislative rep for lunch last week, and obviously met everyone and I've been on the same conversation. I was pretty pointed at an OBI meeting earlier this year where I said it should be the only thing, should be the one and only bill or issue that should be worked on in short session. And we were talking about Measure 110, and I said, as you guys have said, they're definitely going to try to do something. But he told me, he goes, recriminalizing drugs is not on the table, not to be negotiated with. And I don't know if that is correct. And maybe you guys, if that is correct, could explain to me that rationale, because that makes no sense to me. Might be a preview of a question I might ask on Monday at lunchtime, but what would you guys have to say in regards to his comments about that? I mean, that just seems to be the root of the problem. Why don't we just go solve the root of the problem? then we can worry about funding for all the treatment centers and the treatment that they.
So I made several phone calls to leadership in preparation for this event today. And this is an ongoing negotiation, as JL said. My up to the minute as of yesterday conversation is the recriminalization is back on the table, not at a felony level. It'd be a misdemeanor level. The open use is, I believe there's consensus on ending that. The main priority the Democrats have is maintaining the reason that they want, and I believe it's a genuine desire on their part, is to maintain the funding stream for mental health and rehabilitation for drug treatment. And so I do think the compromise on the recriminalization is going to be there with the Mod Caucus and with the Republicans. There's DAs around the entire state that are saying without that stick to compel drug addicts to choose a drug court, to choose a treatment plan, the only help they want is to how to get more drugs, not how to get off them. And so what I heard yesterday is there is a consensus building around putting that recriminalization back in.
But I
But
think,
not a felony. Yeah.
you know, look at on the other side of it, you know, as far as what are the interests that move that other piece of the conversation. Piece of Measure 110 was a significant amount of funding that was supposed to go into treatment and recovery. And I think many of us around the table would say that hasn't gone very well. But you have all of those groups, I would say some here in Oregon, some nationally driven that have come into Oregon that really are invested in those dollars for a many myriad of reasons. And so, you know, they're really vested in trying to maintain that piece of it. And I think that's where a chunk of the argument comes in from is kind of this broader discussion that you hear around the country and other places too about, you know, if we decriminalize it, it'll all be okay. Clearly, Oregon has become the poster child, as we've read in national media all over the country. When I travel, my husband was just at Economic Forum in DC and he sat down and it was with the head of GM and his table said, what is wrong in Oregon? What is wrong with you people? And, you know, I mean, it's heard that, but you know, it makes a lot of sense to us why this would be the right way. And you know, what Ryan's saying is there's a lot of pressure, or what I think Ryan's saying is that there is a lot of pressure though to find that stick. There's a lot of pressure on the other side to keep those dollars moving in treatment and recovery. I'd like to think they could find a better way and to more effectively utilize those and make some difference. And the stick is, I think, one of the ways you have to do it. But, you know, it's a bit of that, forgive me, that kind of that progressive argument that, you know, freedom of choice, freedom of independence, ability to make choices on your own. And it, you know, it's that push pull between those two, you know, two conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. I heard Randy was somebody who's gonna run against a Democrat that's gonna run against Chavez the Reamer. And talk about Measure 110. And I was shocked. She said that she would be for, and there's discussion that they would be for forcibly making them go into treatment centers, not they wouldn't be a choice. Actually, I think that's awesome. So,
I think it's definitely changed, you know, the conversation by seeing the reality on the streets. We've all seen it or heard of it in Portland, and we see it here in Salem. No different. We see it all the time. You know, I'm not comfortable with my 6-year-old being downtown anymore. So, you know, I think I agree with all of my colleagues here. Measure 110 is really the big looming conversation, but how big can that fix be?
Right.
I guess this is for the other Ryan, when he was speaking earlier. I saw, I believe on Orpin, they were putting an RFP out for marketing services for the toll. So they can start advertising, marketing, sell it to the people, if you will. My other question is, what do you think of the governor's ability to choose land use and just go against land use laws and for development?
Can you be more specific?
Well, my understanding is she has the ability to choose a location and not worry about land use laws around it for economic development. Is that not accurate?
I'm not familiar.
Okay,
That's a pretty specific question. I can look into it and get back to Tom and he can
that's good.
get you answer. Sorry.
It was a super citing provision of the CHIPS bill for semiconductor production. Yeah, and the farm.
Talking in relation to tolling?
What's that?
Are you talking in relation to tolling?
I think it was,
No, not with the toll, no.
Okay,
I was saying that RFPs out there for getting that going for advertising March.
Yes, wow.
So on measure 110, addressing the illegal drugs and public use, and that is half of the equation. Is there any chance we can get the tools back to our public safety officers and be able to do search and seizures randomly and get the tools back for them to slow down the influx of drugs coming into our state? As it's being described to me now, Oregon has freeways of access of drugs coming to our main streets and downtowns. And with measure 110, that also allows juveniles to have illegal drugs in their pockets. They can't have a beer or buy cigarettes, but they want heroin and that sort of thing. Are those issues being spoken about now? Have you heard?
I'm not in those conversations. I don't necessarily have a client that is directly involved in those negotiations or that space, but I think everything is kind of on the table and trying to figure that out. And the public safety piece of it is likely a kind of second bite at the apple. I think the first piece is the recriminalization or public use, that sort of thing. But I think the public safety is definitely on folks' radar. And that's something that they're going to have to talk about in this 24 session, because that's going to be a huge election cycle issue.
And to piggyback on Kelsey's point, I work with the fire service pretty extensively, so we're kind of there, but not. Always a tricky spot because fire service isn't allowed to carry weapons, but we're often the first on site. So we're very much paying attention to this. But while there have been, further investments in public safety, it goes back to the same conversation that Chris talked about, a worker shortage. Not a lot of people want to be law enforcement officers right now. It is not really the greatest profession you've ever signed up for when you look at what you're going to have to face on a daily basis. So, there's some significant challenges there. We hope from the fire service, because we count on our law enforcement partners to protect us when we're going in there and to dealing with, drug affected people. We are hoping that with some types of changes to measure 110, that we're going to be able to improve the situation for law enforcement, which in turn will help have enough of them to be on board when we need them, when we go into places. I've been working with some issues around drug endangered children, which was a term I'd never heard before, but now I understand what it is, unfortunately, which is what you're talking about with the rise of drugs coming into the state. Children who are affected by this in a number of, frankly, horrible ways is just escalating here in the state. So, we hope so. But again, it's that worker shortage thing that's really been a challenge within the law enforcement field to try to help bring some more stability to the conversation.
Commissioner, I represent the police officers, and there's been no discussion about that I'm aware of with our client about the tools that you alluded to.
Any other questions for our panelists? I would ask one, and if you had the opportunity to have the governor wave a magic wand, most impactful item she could tackle on behalf of the Oregon community from your perspective. Anybody want to jump on that softball?
I intimated it a little bit in my remarks, but it's been almost 20 years, I think, since we've done a holistic review of regulatory streamlining. And I think through sort of best intentions, agencies sort of expand the scope of the work that they do over time, and eventually they kind of overlap with roles that other agencies play. And after 20 years, you get a number of areas where you have double jurisdiction on issues, and cutting that regulatory red tape. Businesses could save time, save costs, and allow us to be more nimble and react. That'd be a big step.
Thanks, Raj.
Wow, tough question. I would say, and I know this will sound me, but I actually think that strong economic development investments, not just in specific industries, but in business as a whole, small business and large business. I think the CHIPS Act was important and significant, but the stronger you make business in a community, the stronger the community is. The stronger the business owners are invested in the community and invested in the fixes. You know, all of us here have different charitable endeavors that we participate in as business owners and invest our time and money in, and all of you too, and come around and invest your time and your energy, and whether it's a profit, whether it's the chamber, whatever that is. But it has to be looked at as more holistic and not necessarily one industry at a time. You know, I would think that the stronger you make the economic engine of a community, the stronger you make the economic engine of a state, the better the environment is as a whole for support and, you know, local investment.
I think there's probably a lot of things that fall under this, but I'm just gonna say livability issues. So, I mean, I think economic development falls under that, public safety falls under that, the housing issues, education, I mean, but that is kind of the overarching issue I think that Oregon is facing, is that people want to live here, and taxes fall under that. So I would just say kind of a more inviting livability in Oregon.
I think the biggest, most pressing issue is industrial capacity. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Grants Pass. I you know, paid for my school working at the plywood mill, and I know what happened to the town when all the mills were left. And so I just, that's just where my heart is. I feel like we need industrial capacity, because not just because of the jobs involved, but businesses that rely on business cycle and all the support businesses that support the industries. I just feel like that's where a real economy comes from, and I feel like we've just gone out of our way to make it completely cost ineffective to engage in any industry in this state, and that just really hurts me.
Breach. Before I send us on our way with a couple last items, join me in thanking our panelists. One of the things we know, our relationship building and connecting works, and we did an ELC access event a month ago, I guess about a month ago, with Senator Deb Patterson. We are going to be expanding that quite a bit, and we'll be hosting on February 7th from right here in this room a legislative social. And so we'll be inviting the entire body of those available. They will come with many of them, their legislative support staff and the like, but it's a great time for you as a chamber member to come meet your local legislators, share some conversations. We'd love to have you in this room. We're going to have a hosted environment where you can have a sip and a light bite, and it will be a great time. So we'd encourage you to join us on February 7th. And then lastly, again, please get your ticket for Monday, Governor Kotek at our forum speaker series luncheon. It's a mouthful even for me. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all for coming back today.